Welcome to Miele. My name is Vicki Robb. I'm here today in the Miele Experience Center in Princeton. Today we're going to be making a focaccia bread. We love this recipe because it's so fast that you can make it in under 3 hours. Focaccia bread is delicious with all different types of toppings. Today we're going to do a simple bread with rosemary and salt. So please come back and we'll get started. To get started, we have a few ingredients we need to combine to make our bread dough. So we're going to start with 1.5 cups of warm water that we're just going to add our yeast, just an instant yeast, and some sugar. I always like to incorporate those first. Make sure your yeast is active. It should get a little foamy, especially with that sugar in the yeast and warm water. And we're just going to set that aside for a few minutes while I combine our flour and our salt. So I have my flour. I'm going to put it in a large bowl. You could use glass or metal. I just put it in this glass bowl so you could see it a little better. And then our salt. I have a kosher salt here that I'm using, and a little bit of olive oil to the dough. So focaccia is a much wetter dough than some of the other breads we've made. It will be very sticky, and that's part of the reason why it comes out so nicely. Flatter than a loaf bread, and you can cut it into pieces, which I like, rather than slices. So you just want to make sure your salt is completely incorporated with the olive oil, and then I'm going to go ahead and add my yeast with my water. Just pour it in. No need to be slow or careful, just dip it right in there. And I'm going to combine it with my tool. Now it's a pretty shaggy looking dough, so I want to go in with my hands a little bit and just turn over the dough to make sure I have all the loose flour. It's not going to look like a beautiful finished loaf that you're ready to pop in the oven. Again, this is the first stage of the dough, and that's all we need to do. It's going to look like this, like I said, kind of shaggy. We're just going to keep it in the bowl now for about 2 hours, covered with some plastic wrap, and then we'll come back and we'll get ready to do the next stage. Before we put our dough on the round baking tin, I'd like to preheat the oven. So the first thing we need to do is turn the oven on and go into our operating mode. We're going to use the Moisture Plus program, and I'm going to increase the temperature up to 400 degrees. And we'll use 1 burst of steam, and it will be manual. So now we'll just wait for the oven to preheat, and we'll get our dough shaped on the round baking tin before we bake it. We're ready to shape our dough, so I put a little bit of flour on the countertop to start. You don't need much. The dough is a really nice texture, but we just want to fold it over itself a little bit. So to do that, I'm just going to take one side of the dough and stretch it out and fold it almost like an envelope, and do a quarter turn and keep stretching until you've done that on all 4 sides. And then I'm going to make it into a nice ball before I shape it onto the pan. So to do that, I use the palms of my hands, and I'm just going to rub my hands down the countertop with the dough between my palms and just scraping it along, and you see it makes a nice round dough shape that you would use for a traditional loaf. But what we're going to do is put it on a round baking tin. This is the perfect size pan to bake the focaccia. It's a really nice crispy finish on the bottom when you add this 2 tablespoons of olive oil. We're just going to spread that around the bottom of the pan. Place our dough on the top. You can even get some of the olive oil on your fingers while you shape the dough out. It's not going to stretch all the way to the edge of the pan to start. We're going to come back in about 10 minutes and shape it further. But this is just our first shaping. I'm going to cover it with some plastic wrap, and we'll come back in 10 minutes. We just have one more shape before we put the focaccia in the oven, and we want to add our rosemary and salt. So I will uncover it. It's been sitting for the 10 minutes. just use my fingers to spread it a little bit further out to the edges of the pan. It's always nice to use your fingers to dimple the dough. Just make little divots there and press it out. Continue turning it. And again, it's gonna sit for 10 more minutes, so don't take too much time doing that. We're gonna add the rosemary, as much as you like, pretty finely chopped, and then some salt. Okay, I'm gonna cover it back up, and then once it sits for 10 more minutes, it's time to go into the oven. We finished the final rest of the dough, but first we want to add our burst of steam before we put the focaccia in the oven. So it's already preheated to 400 degrees. I have my oven rack ready on shelf level 2. So let's give it our burst of steam. You're just gonna press start. The burst of steam is active. So while that gets activated a little bit, I'm just gonna uncover the dough. Give it a little more to the edges, just spread it a little bit more. It's beautiful. And I think I might even add a tiny little bit more salt because I just love salt. Okay, we are ready to go in the oven now, and then I will set my timer for 20 minutes. It may take as long as 25, but I want to go with the lower time because you could always add more time. So we'll go to 20. Okay. And we will come back in 20 minutes and see if we need to add more time. We have about 10 seconds left before the focaccia comes out of the oven. Just wanted to make sure you were here for the big moment. So let's go ahead and open the oven. It's perfectly golden brown on top. Put that on the counter and turn my timer off. So now we're just gonna let it sit for a few minutes, probably 10 or 15 minutes before we can cut it open. But it just rose just the perfect amount so that we could cut it into slices like a pie, or we could try to make sandwiches out of it. So we'll take a look at it once it's cooled. We're ready to cut open the focaccia. I could tell you it smells amazing, the fresh rosemary. The color is just a beautiful golden color from that burst of steam that we added, and it also helped it to rise. We have a nice crust on here, but not too crusty that we won't be able to eat it as a sandwich or dip it into some olive oil. I don't know about you, but I think this is the perfect focaccia, and I can't wait to taste it. So I hope you enjoyed this recipe and you'll try it at home. Thanks.